Welcome to Beyond Possible Club podcast. I'm your host, Julia Borgan, and today we will be diving in on the topic of addiction. And I have a very special guest joining me today, Michael Cossette. Welcome, Michael.
Glad to
And
be here.
yeah, I'll start by introducing yourself. I have your bio here that will give our listeners and viewers a great short insight into your background and where you're today. So, well, first of all, today Michael is in Florida, where it's so hot he had to turn off the fan to make the audio recording great. And for this episode, while I'm freezing my butt and covered in blanket in Ottawa, Canada. So, Michael is a Catholic Buddhist. How's that for opening? And he's a former synthetic organic chemist, a founder of Cogniventus, a research and consulting company focused on ending addiction by addressing the war within self. With a career spanning the development of late-stage chemotherapy drugs and palliative painkillers, Michael transitioned in 2011 to tackle addiction through a blend of science, history, religion, and philosophy. A former addict himself, he redefines addiction as a profound opportunity for self-discovery rather than a condition to recover from. Michael's groundbreaking work includes engineering moral gyroscopes to guide individuals towards healing and revealing the universal human truths addiction exposes. Welcome, Michael.
It's very nice.
Oh, I got nervous. I typically don't get nervous, but this topic is so important to me. And I'm excited. Like, I guess my nervousness is my excitement. So I just need to remember to breathe. And how are you feeling? What are you expecting from this conversation?
Well, I already gave you a hint, was that we've both done our preparation, but I know with this particular topic, uh, you can't talk about it for an hour without something new coming out that neither one of us have thought about before. And we may not even be aware of it until we look at the transcript or look at the video back. But this is a topic that with a lot of surprises. Uh,
Definitely a complex topic. So let's start by kind of giving the bird eye view, kind of the view of the land, whatever expression we can use, for our listeners who maybe don't know much about addiction and find it terrifying, confusing, mysterious, and just really a big unknown. I mean, it's unknown for those of us who have been studying it for many years. But let's just give us an overview of different models of addiction or framework, perspectives, views that one can encounter once they start understanding what is that.
Regardless of the information that we've accumulated over, say, the last 100 years, 85 years, let's stay within that framework. There are essentially three models of addiction. The way we tend to understand addiction is very much the way we tend to understand ourselves, because addiction is an all-encompassing, all-consuming phenomena for the person who is addicted and for those around them. So if you tend to think of us as a body, a biological organism that can be healthy and unhealthy, then naturally terms like disease will come out. So that's one of the models. If you tend to think of us as more mind, having agency, words like free will and choice will come out. If you go past that, having a body that occupies space and a mind that seems to change through time, you get into this nebulous little area that's not quite space-time. We've never known what to call it. It's been called soul. For this purpose, we'll call it spirit. It's that sort of catch-all. Everything that's not body, mind, we're going to call it spirit. And of course, that's always tacked on culturally to different religions. So if you look at that spiritual aspect, then things like character and morality are going to come up And even that three-letter word sin, which is nothing to be afraid of because it simply means missing the mark. I mean, a lot of people know that now. So the top three, and they are fully active now, are it's a disease, a malfunction on a biological level, it's a choice, the person does it, and it's a sin. Okay. It's and that doesn't mean necessarily the person has a weak character any more than all of us have characters that are always not always doing the right thing. But those are the three, and I can tell you they're all doing well. They're all well and good today, in spite of the fact that we hear mostly about disease. That's mainly the megaphone of the addiction and recovery treatments who depend on it being a disease, or else how could they treat it? But there are, if you talk to people outside the addiction recovery community, there are still people who simply will look at what an addict does, look at their behavior, and cannot come to any conclusion other than there's something wrong morally with them. And even if they don't use the term moral, that's just not acceptable human behavior. And of course, there's some people who will just say they did it to themselves. They had free will. They did it to themselves. So those are the top three. Okay. And they're alive and well. Now they have since in 1981, National Institute of Drug Abuse came out with over 40 different definitions, distinct ideologies of what addiction was. That was over 40 years ago. Okay. And it was a brilliant, absolutely brilliant monograph. It described addiction as a in relationship. For instance, theories about relationship to self, relationship to others, relationship to environment. It was extraordinarily beautiful and the most profound document. And then it went downhill from there. Because what we do now is we've come to the point where, well, body, mind, spirit's not enough. So now we have popular today biopsychosocial. Okay, we start hyphenating. It's an odd thing that we need in order to take a holistic view of addiction. We chop ourselves up into as many parts as we can, and we're supposed to address all those simultaneously. And that's one of the reasons why the treatment fails so often. You can cut up that ontological turkey ad infinitum. You can add moral, you can add ecological, you can add economic, you can add, because if indeed what I believe is that if an addiction is a real delivering over of self to that war within, if that's true, then all of it's delivered, every little part who you are. So it doesn't really matter how you chop it up. So now, if we had 43 views of addiction in 1981, you can imagine we have hundreds now. And the addiction recovery community, they know that they're drowning in their own definitions. Addiction and of course recovery now have become terms that when you read it, you really can't know what the person means by it. So it's almost impossible when you read the literature to put together any sort of knowledge base. We have all this information, but we don't have consequential knowledge. That was a term Thomas Sewell used. That's knowledge that is transformative. I mean, knowledge is fine, but this is knowledge that counts. In other words, what are the key things I need to know about addiction that are immediately transformative? Not down the line, right now, something right now that'll change the way I think about my life and what I'm doing and the people around me. So that's sort of how we define addiction depends very much on how we define ourselves. And so addiction is not a malfunction at any level of being or becoming. It is a natural evolution of a species, us, Homo sapiens sapiens, so smart we named it twice, that does not know who it is, does not know what it wants, and cannot get enough of what does not satisfy it. That's what we're stuck with. So the key word here, if I were to choose one word that to refocus, it would be humility. In other words, and I define humility as the clear-eyed recognition of who we are and the courage to live that truth. You might recognize that. It's a little paraphrase of some 12-step writing. I believe it was in the 12 and 12. I altered it a little bit, but it's a really good idea. In other words, just take a look at who we are and what we are. And if you take a historical look, since 1985, which I tagged that as simply because that's when the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written. And you go to say 1941, when that's when I actually went into treatment. I was one of the very first people to go into a treatment program at Anheuser-Busch, which was sort of ironic. I decided, before graduate school, I decided, 3 years of drinking nonstop would be really a nice thing to do. And but those days,
that's some hard looking at who you are. That's like waving a big flag. I don't know who I
am. Yeah. And so it is a big flag.
It is a big flag, and specifically to drinking, I often kind of jokingly tell people that drinking is not a problem, it's a solution. It's a very good solution. Well, I don't know if at that time, it's a solution. Maybe I shouldn't be attaching the word good to it. So can you say that definition again? It's not knowing who we are. Can you
Oh, okay.
It's so powerful.
The idea, it's looking at ourselves. Addiction, I would say, is an acute manifestation of the chronic human condition. They like to think that addiction is chronic. It's being human that's chronic. It's that fragmentation that comes from just simple consciousness. See, we're all at this level of biology and psychology and all this sort of stuff. Let's just go back to that first moment when consciousness emerges in yourself. You can think about it historically, but you can also do it in meditation, in your own thoughts. Think about what it was like to be a hominid, connected to the environment, protected by your own instincts. You knew what to do. Something attacked, you did it, boom, boom, boom. And then all of a sudden, it probably happened several different places on the planet. Self-awareness happened, which means instead of being apart, really intimately connected to the world around you, all of a sudden you have a sense that you're in here. There's something in here, and everything else is out there. Now that's scary, because you got to make sense of all of that. So you have to make it's a very difficult thing to do. So we have to sort of organize. So if we start with that fundamental bewilderment, then it's not much of a stretch to say that the natural outcome of a species that has now lost its instinct and must make choices, must decide, doesn't automatically know what's safe and what's not, but now must decide. And when you decide, then there's a time gap, and then you have to organize. It's not much of a stretch to see how that basic problem would develop into not really knowing who you are, not really knowing what you want, and not getting enough, never being able to get enough of what does not satisfy you. And this has been said in a lot of different ways. Buddha used the term unsatisfactoriness, dukkha. It doesn't actually mean, it's not exactly suffering, but there's, it's just not enough. No matter, it's just not enough. There's something about life that I'm missing. It's just not enough. So that's I wouldn't really call it a definition, but to me it's a way. One of the primary things that I like to do or want to do is for people to understand the humanity in their addiction and the addiction in their humanity. That's really the only way I think we're going to make any sort of progress, is for a person to who is not addicted to look at an addicted person and not say, well, they're bad character, anything else like that. Not say they must not have free will, or not even say that they're diseased, because that didn't stop stigma either. So when people come up to me, who I get a lot of people who have relatives, people close to them who are addicted, and I don't understand it, Michael. What's going on there? And so the first thing I tell them is the first thing you have to understand is that if they're in full in addiction, and we're not talking about dependency or any of those substance use disorders, there's lots of abusive ways to do things that don't come. Addiction is a beast unto itself with very specific qualities. But when you get to that part where you're trapped in that cycle, that cyclic wanting, not wanting, swearing off, going back, when you're stuck in that perpetual cycle, what the person doesn't see from the outside is that the addict really wants to quit as much as they want to continue. And so what do you do is wait for that. I call it the cubic centimeter of opportunity. There will come a moment when it'll drop. And at that moment, they'll be willing to listen. What happened to me was in 1981, I'm trying to remember, is January 24th was when I went. It was probably right around 29th or so. I was pacing the halls of this psychiatric ward that I was in. And I got to figure a way to get out of this. It wasn't my first time there. I had no intention of quitting drinking, none whatsoever. I was planning to get out and get drunk that day. Counselor comes by, takes a look at me and says, Michael, I know what it's like to be a smart drunk. That was it. That's all he said. See, the thing is that I was trying to get out of it with what I knew best, which was to outthink it. A direct assault on my addiction by outthinking it. And he just said, you're not going to do it. It's that simple. And so that's where we get to, I think, one of the foundational human events. The good news about all this is that the problem of addiction has its own solution. So at that particular moment, it was just like a switch was flipped. And 1 minute, I didn't think I ever be able to stop drinking. And then just a second later, I knew I never had to drink. I mean, unless I wanted to. I just knew that. It was very dramatic, but it was also sort of subtle. It's like, okay, well, that's over. And this is usually called spontaneous remission, but that's a sort of a incorrect term, because you don't really know what was going on inside my head. I mean, did he key in on some sort of idea that I've had for some time? Were there a bunch of other things going subconsciously and in the ether that led to that? But the truth is, and one of the foundational achievement is that the war within self will occasionally end on its own. And I mean immediately, completely. And when it comes to addiction, it's really dramatic. It's really dramatic. And when you ask people, and I've asked thousands over 40 years, what happened? What happened? And they always report two things. And this is how I got on the war within self is important. They always report something inside, I don't know what happened. That's the first thing. But I can tell you this, something inside of me stopped fighting. And when I looked in the mirror, that wasn't me anymore. I could tell.
It's
So,
like an
that
instant reboot. Like to me, it sounds
instant,
like
yeah,
it's like an instant realization. I don't know, is it Satori? Like, like the term, like instantly knowing, like in the truth coming through. And we also in the preparation to this discussion, we talked about like what is percentage of people that it can, we know, whatever data that it happens, this spontaneous remission or this like somebody can call it like that spiritual enlightenment or something like that shift in consciousness and energy and everything, many ways to potentially describe it. Like I think it's 10 to 20 something percent, right?
yeah.
That data.
It depends a lot on whether you're actually talking about addiction. Um, my anecdotal experience puts it at about 1 in 10 of the people I've talked to, people I've known. Um, and we're talking, tens of thousands of people that I've come across over 40 years, and that's not that many. It sounds like a lot. It's not, if you're active out there. Um, the literature says somewhere between 1 in 4 and 1 in 10. But like I
Okay.
said, yeah. So it doesn't matter, but it matters how you define it. But uh, the main thing is that it's an undeniable fact, and we're not studying because it's within the whole addiction recovery thing, which is essentially no more addiction bad, recovery good.
Mhm.
Let's and fill in the blanks. Within that,
Yeah,
that's considered an
Michael,
anomaly.
and I'm just gonna kind of for our listeners clarify here that by no means we're not advocating to sit and wait till your addicted family member has potentially a shift or for you to wait for that shift. It, from what we know, like we know it can happen. The percentage of it happening, is not 100 or 80. So the odds at this point, you could still, it's important to know it exists, and we need to study it more. The same way as some people believe that we should study placebo effect on a drug testing more than the drugs. What is it about the placebo that makes people recover from whatever disease that is? So I think would that be accurate?
Oh yeah, and like when I was talking about someone coming up to me and asking for advice, I would what I would say to them is I would never talk about the idea that of the spontaneous remission. When I say look for a moment, I say just look for a moment when they're willing to do anything. That doesn't mean that cubic centimeter of opportunity does not mean that the world's opening up. Although I realized that when I told the story of mine after that, and I'm glad you picked up on that. No, there'll come a point where they're at least willing to do something. But we also shouldn't shy away from asking ourselves, what does this mean if the solution already exists for a small group of people, relatively small group of
Yeah.
people?
And allow me just to step back to summarize like that initial introduction that you did about variety of different definitions and frameworks and models of addiction. I was kind of excited when you first said 3. I was like, oh, good, that's great. 3 is great. And then you said, but they could be 40 plus. And I know that in terms of what's on the marketplace, popular books that draw people attention is Addiction About Connection. It's about community and connecting with others. It's about dopamine. It's very, specific, like kind of like seeking reward. So there is a lot of different things. And then there is also, like, we're going to talk more hopefully today about this very powerful modern spiritual organization with great power and influence, Alcoholics Anonymous, and any other 12-step groups that currently does also comply and accept the disease model of addiction, but ultimately it's all about spiritual solution. So there is many things, and the reason we're here is to actually look at something unique that you are offering and you bringing to the table to look almost like at the root cause, at the foundational condition that all those different perspectives, framework, models can plug into, and that's the war within self and that wanting unwitting. So let's dive a bit more into that. What is that war within self? How is it happening, and what can we do about it?
The war within self is probably one of the oldest memes out there, going back thousands of years. People have struggled to do the right thing. I always refer to that wonderful passage from Paul. I do not know who I am. I don't understand myself. What I want to do, I don't do that. What I don't want to do, I can't help myself from doing that. So it's sort of endemic in who we are. So that's good news in the sense that it's something universal. Now, regarding addiction, the breakthrough idea that I had around 2003, 2004 was understanding that what causes an addiction is not the same thing as what powers an addiction. Okay. What causes an addiction is all that biopsychosocial, all that sort of stuff. And you actually helped me with this metaphor. Think about building a car. You can build lots of different kinds of cars, different configurations of plastic and metal and glass. So you have thousands of different versions of cars, but you need, well, we're going to stick with gas models. You need gas for the car to go. With the war within self, it's the gas that pushes the addictive mechanism. So this is really quite extraordinary. And it goes back to, can there be an instantaneous end? Can you just stop an addiction? I mean, is it really possible? I mean, does it have to be prolonged recovery? Is there a way? Now, and I know when I'm saying that, and it's good that you brought it up, that people don't like me saying that because you says you give people false hope. No, that's not what I'm doing. I'm a researcher. You go about do what you need to do to survive. Don't I'm just working in the trenches here researching. It's an extraordinary thing to think that you end the war within self and you end the addiction, regardless of what causes the addiction, regardless of what the addiction is, regardless of how much damage it's done. You let go, you stop fighting. It's one of the oldest, they call it surrender to win, and a lot of and everybody's familiar with that feeling, struggle, and then you let go, and all of a sudden it's like the problem, it says right in the big book, we've talked about Alcoholics Anonymous, the problem has been removed, it no longer exists for us. You don't hear that kind of talk in any treatment these days. The problem has been removed, it no longer exists for us, because now the mechanism for the addiction is still in place, all that trauma and stuff, but there's no gas. It's not being powered by anything. So if it is possible, and we know that it is possible, it's spontaneous. Well, not spontaneously happens. It happens immediately to, say, 1 in 4 or 1 in 10 of the addicted. If it is possible to end this war within self, then we've overcome a lot of the problems of looking for a solution based on cause. Because any collage of experiences throughout one's life can assemble itself into addiction. It does not have to be trauma. It does not have to be anything. My addiction started when I was 7 years old. And I've told this story before. And I'm an innocent little Catholic kid, and I signed this little pledge. I promise to make up for the sins, the terrible sins of people who drink wrongly. Those people, the terrible sins, the things they do when they drink wrongly. To make up for that, I am not going to drink until the age of 21. 7 years old, I got to sign this thing. Now, there were 26, 25, I was the 26th, other kids who signed that pledge. I'm pretty sure none of them took it as seriously as I did. So I'm obsessed for the next 8 years, obsessed with not drinking. Occupies my mind all the time. I'm obsessed with not drinking as anyone who is obsessed with drinking every day. So when at 15, off to the races, you see. And I know there are a lot of people, we don't know how these mechanisms of addiction assemble. We know they're multivariate, and they're so multivariate, so multiplex, so complex that the idea that you can find a root cause of addiction and then eliminate it by that, they either in treatment either go vacillate between one size fits all, or everybody gets their own plan. And neither one of them makes any sense. What's really interesting about the war within self idea is that you just simply pull the plug on the addiction. You neutralize the power. Power is a concept that when people are addicted, they feel a loss of power. I know a lot of people don't like the way AA talks about powerlessness. But what it was originally meant, and I guess we can get into this kind of detail, was essentially the experience that we just talked about. It was an event in which in one moment you feel like you have no power, and in the next moment you got your power back. How does that happen? That's what it, but then it became a concept, like all things that become concepts.
Yeah.
They lose their vitality.
I just want to intersect here because it was one of my points of view that in some cases, people are using substance like alcohol to actually feel powerful in control, both their emotions, so they can control the situation. So I think in those cases, the idea of powerlessness, that you're powerless over your addiction, is repelling, because the whole thing we're trying to do is control the world, and control the circumstances and people in our life. And because it's so impossible to do and frustrating, in those cases, addiction to alcohol becomes like, a way to manage our frustration with uncontrollable world. So that's kind of like, I'm just gonna insert my point of view there, but carry on where you're going with that.
So imagine you're on an escalator. Okay. You're walking up a down escalator. Okay. And you're trying to get to the top. And you try a little faster, and the escalator matches your speed. So that no matter what you do, you stay in the same place. So how do you get up? What's the solution? You stop the escalator. You pull the plug on the escalator. And that's what pulling the plug on the war with itself does. Because without that, and this is probably the time to give an operational definition of addiction within this. And it has 4 components. It's scarily simple, but it's difficult to talk about because it's a, addiction is a delivering over of self. Let's start with that. Okay. Could be voluntary, could be involuntary, doesn't matter. What are you giving yourself over? You're giving yourself over to that war within self, that cyclic battle between wanting and not wanting. Okay. That's the thing. Most of us concentrate on craving. Most of us, that's the thing that pushes it. But what really pushes it is the back and forth between wanting and not wanting, because the brain does not care. The alcoholic brain, and I hate that term, but it's just for this, does not care whether you drink or doesn't drink. They just want you to be thinking about it. They want you to be either wanting it, not wanting it. Just like my little friend Michael for 8 years, it was all about that. Okay, so that's the cycle. Once you get caught in that, in fact, there's a passage in the big book that says there will come a day when he cannot live with alcohol and he cannot live without alcohol. It's exactly the same thing, you know. So you get into this thing, you can't live with it, you can't live without it. And so what is it that you want? Is that you want to change your experience of what's happening in the present. You want to get out of it. You either want to intensify it because, like in my history, you're somewhat anhedonic, not prone to feeling pleasure or happiness. So you want to either intensify your life or you want to diminish the pain in it. So you've got that struggle there. And that particular attempt to alter the present will, because it's that duality there, always leads to positive and negative consequences. In fact, the negative consequences are extremely important to snapping the addictive cycle shut. And there are a lot of studies who have talked about that. So 4 elements, each of which have a duality to it. Delivering over, voluntary or involuntary, wanting or not wanting, experience of the present, diminished or intensified, and positive and negative consequences. When you put that all together, wanting and not wanting to drink become essentially equivalent, and positive and negative consequences become irrelevant. You just don't care. You really don't. And it's a cycle that cannot be gotten out of directly, because addiction is a mutable beast. Because at each particular stage, it has its opposite in there. You know, voluntary, involuntary, wanting, not yet. Because of all of that, no matter what you do, you've tweaked something else, and the cage still stays closed. It's a constant cycle. And once you're in it, like you can't. So who surrenders to who in a war within self? Because we talked about surrender. But it's interesting that the initial act of getting into addiction is a surrendering of self. But we also talked about this immediate ending of addiction, which I would call a surrendering to self. The words sort of fail in this, but who surrenders to who in a war within self? Nobody. So you can't win against an addiction. And in spite of what you can't, what a lot of people think the whole powerlessness is, you can't really lose either. You can't voluntarily throw in the towel. Okay. So you can't win, you can't lose, you can't treat it, because when you try to treat it, it shifts to something else. It's
Oh, this whole
mutable.
idea of shape shifting, we have to come back to that. So we'll make sure we come back to the addiction transference and shape shifting.
And the data point there is another anomaly. And we need to talk about, well, at the end, we'll talk about the paradigm thing. But the other anomaly is that when people with, say, 15 years of sobriety go out drinking again, they find out that it's not the same addiction at all. It's a completely different monster.
Yeah.
You know,
oh my God. furiously, as you see me putting my glasses, moving my papers, and those of you on video, I am like looking and looking for something that I thought I had super handy here, and now I found it. So I just have to get it out of myself and share, because it's very relevant to one of the things that you already shared about, is the substance magnifies or diminishes addiction. And that's like, I found one of the powerful readings you had, that like powerful writings that I read, and it's something that I identified was part of it, and I just want to share it with everybody. So you wrote, as an intellectual gifted child, I succeeded early in life. But as an emotionally troubled child, I failed as often as I had succeeded. And I mean big successes and big failures. So I identified strongly with this. What was different for me is what you described next. You said my problem was that success brought no joy, and the failure brought no sadness. Discovering a half-gallon of Shivas in my father's liquor cabinet provided an unambiguous solution. Drink enough and you will feel good. Drink too much and you feel really bad. Win-win. At least you feel something. I would quickly master the art and science of extracting the maximum amount of big feeling from alcohol, blackout drinking. And where it was different for me in early in life is that, and even at some point it's kind of shifts what alcohol was doing, is that I experienced very big feelings that neither I or anybody around me could handle. And for me, alcohol was the way to numb, to kind of get to not feeling and not knowing what to do with this big feelings on either side. But at the same time, at some point for me, when I had like 10 years of unassisted sobriety, that I got so numb. I got so numb with busyness mostly, and with, crazy workaholic tendencies and overworking, that when I started drinking, for me, it was like almost alcohol served a different purpose. It was like, oh my gosh, like I can feel again. So, and that's what you mean by, so maybe like explain based on this example, that one of the things that you give example
Well,
of how it magnifies, it can be both. It can be
it
numbing,
can be both. Well, that's
it can be
why I actually,
magnifying.
yeah, well, that I actually, and I've already told you this, but I actually changed that definition, because I posted that particular operational definition a couple of times, because it's going to take a couple of times for it to take. It's not fun. It's not, it's like, oh yeah, it's very analytical. But the original thing was an intensified experience of the present, which was something I got out of the book by Dostoevsky, The Gambler, and I actually posted on that, and I thought that was a good thing. And then when you told me yesterday exactly what you just said here, I realized that and it worked even perfectly, because at each stage of this addiction, there's a choice. It's a drastic choice, voluntary choice, sometimes made for you, voluntary or involuntary, wanting, not wanting, diminish or intensify, positive consequences, negative consequences, although you often don't be able to distinguish between that. They're drastic things as each one, but you notice that that's all open-ended. There's no content in any of that. So what the advantage of this particular model, and I'm going to, in the next 16 months, I'm going to lay out in detail how the biopsychosocial model, the trauma model, all those models can be fit into this one, without exception, because I left it open-ended. And each one of those pieces was something that I just scavenged. I'm a real scavenger when it comes to intellectual and spiritual things. What other people throw away, oh no, I'm taking that. That's
You
good.
we're collectors, we're collecting, accumulating, and then it's going to be all synthesized.
Yeah. So the advantage is I'm reasonably certain, and so far, a lot of people are getting on board. I'm reasonably certain that if we take, and this war within self is it's a universal thing. It's not like I just made it up. Okay. Uh, it's something that we have
Oh, Paul was
so much.
talking about it
Yeah.
back in the days, you
And
know?
and you can see it in Buddhism and everything else. But the fear that people have, I think the fear that people have is that uh, this addiction might be simpler than we think it is. Uh, it appears complex, but I think we've learned that a lot of things appear complex that really aren't that complex to begin with. Uh, we focus on the complexities. So if we can take this war within self as a foundational achievement, okay, and we don't know how, but it clearly
Mhm.
it's programmed into us. If enough people get around this and say, you know what, is there a way we can take this war within self idea and apply it to people who don't have that experience? In other, who don't have that instantaneous release, who struggle.
Mhm.
Maybe there's some information in there. And that actually happened about 85 years ago when Bill Wilson announced his white light experience. Okay.
And just for those who don't know who Bill W. is, it just quick intro.
Yeah,
The
he's the co-founder of AA, and I'll do a little
Alcoholics
name drop.
Anonymous. So he's the
Yeah,
one.
Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'll do a little name dropping because he's also my sponsor. So I feel
I love that. I love
yeah,
that. It's like a
and people.
lineage thing that, that's, puts you so close to the purity and origin of Alcoholics Anonymous, which because it's evolved in itself, and obviously like everything else evolves, and what we see today is not necessarily what was there when it started, good or bad, you know.
Yeah,
And
good or bad.
Michael,
People.
I just want to actually share with everybody and you, because I haven't shared it with you, like why when I met you or met your writing on LinkedIn, that's how we connected. I somehow saw it, somebody maybe liked or commented from my network, and I started reading what you write. It just drew me in, and this war within self drew me in so much. And I actually, when I was preparing for this, I dug out one of the quotes that by Marion Woodman, who is an analytical psychologist and Canadian author of multiple books. Because for a while I was contemplating this idea of the paradox, because there are a couple situations. Yes, there is addiction, but there is also like other situations in life that kind of ended up leading to addictive behavior around them, not necessarily with a substance. That was just like I couldn't decide. That wanting, not wanting, for example, wasn't about the drinking. Wanting, not wanting was either about the person or decision to stay or go win the job, and it was so intensified, and I was being pulled apart, and there was like, and the more I was trying to decide or make myself do this versus that, the more I was being stuck. So I'm just going to read it out and to share that what Marion wrote. Holding an inner and outer conflict quietly instead of attempting to resolve it quickly is a difficult idea to entertain. It's even more challenging to experience. However, as Carl Jung believed, if we held the tension between the two opposing forces, there would emerge a third way, which would unite and transcend the two. Whatever the third way is, it usually comes as a surprise because it has not penetrated our defenses until now. A hasty move to resolve tension can abort growth of the new. If we can hold conflict in psychic utero, that's one of my favorite things. If we can hold conflict in psychic utero long enough, we can give birth to something new in ourselves. And so for me, like learning, like that was probably like a year and a half ago when I was like, this is a paradox, because like my mind wanted to decide black and white, this and that, you know, it's either this or that. And I was like, okay, no, this is a paradox. Both valid. If I can stand in mystery and tolerate the unknown, like I hold the key, basically. And so I think that that's when I found this quote, I was like, that's why I fell in love with, you know, your writing, you know, and how you describe things pertaining to addiction specifically, which is just the magnification of a human condition. And so, yeah. And is that ultimately or a key step to war within, is to observe it, is to hold it, or like take me somewhere from here?
Oh, this Marion Woodman, there was a Buddhist uh, periodical known as Tricycle, may still be around, and they did a issue on addiction, and the very best essay in there was by Marion Woodman, and I highlighted it and underlined it until the paper was torn through. She's brilliant, but let's go back to what the people who experience an immediate liberation. Let's just call that it's an immediate liberation. A gift of grace. Grace is built into the mechanism of reality also, that these spontaneous things happen. So I said they report, they look in the mirror and they go, that's not me anymore. So there's a thing known as the silent witness. And it's known through all perennial philosophies and primordial religions. In that war within self, there's the capacity for a watcher to emerge back there. We don't, I don't know, is it you? Is it unconscious? Is it something else altogether? But I have always been aware, well, since I was a child, that there was a part of me that was not involved in anything that I was doing. A silent witness. Had that, it's eerie. Unaffected by anything that happened to me, good or bad. Nonplussed by anything I've done. So when they say, that's not me anymore, think about just a chess match, the war within self, self against self. I mean, visualize it like you against you, and then visualizing a third you coming out that from not, it's partly because of it, partly not because of it. But in other words, a third self emerges. That's not either one of those. But that third self is not part of the war within self. It's a different self. And I think that's exactly, I think what she described. And so you asked, I think you asked me, can we end addiction? Yes, we can end it. We can end, absolutely. Can you end the war within self? Not really. You can end it temporarily. Okay, it'll flare up again. But what you can do is take these struggling dualities that we talked about, you know, the wanting and not wanting, intensified, diminished, positive, negative, voluntary, involuntary. We can take those battling dualities and we can turn them into polarities that work together. And the easiest visualization of that is the yin yang symbol. It's the yin yang is dualistic and non-dualistic at the same time. So when you can balance that, and one of the questions you asked me was about, and since we're talking about impossible, one of the things I thought that was always impossible in my life was this constant battle. My war within self is between thought and feeling. It wasn't until I came upon a book called Personality Types that I realized that I'm at my best. I work well together. They work well together. Thought and feeling. At worst, it's horrible. If I think too much, I get so abstracted that I can't feel. I don't know what I'm feeling. Can't identify. If my feelings get too intense, I can't think. So I'm at the point now where they work together like that yin yang symbol, thought and feeling together. And I got that through my writing. My writing is what united them. And so when you're talking about picking up on my writing, what you saw in that writing, you actually saw evidence of the end of my war within self, or at least the balancing of those polarities. Because there's a tension in my writing because it's intellectual and yet it's still evocative of emotions. That's what people tell me. It used to be all analytical or all emotional, but the balance.
Yeah, it's very moving right now. And I would just stop. I know we would tell people more at the end how to get in contact with you. But number one thing to do for people who are on LinkedIn is to find you, Michael V. Cossette, on LinkedIn and start following the content or read what's, the recent post, because what you put out is very thought-provoking and it does have, heart in it. It's not all intellectual. And also I really like the engagement that you have right now. Like people comment and people provide their views, and then that exchange that happens between you and them, like, is just, I don't know, like for me, like I said, almost salivating. That's like intellectual buffet of some sort of deliciousness, like like I
Okay.
think that sometimes I'm starved for, I'm personally starved for, this intellectual stimulation of that level. And because of like the content that's especially like on things on a lot of social media, it's just now it's getting kind of worse with AI, because it's just kind of like for lowest common denominator to get like some sort of engagement, or that's not really thoughtful engagement. So I find you such a breath of fresh air on LinkedIn, specifically to be offering such deep intellectual and emotional insights, and then having now the following that engages so well with it, and you're there responding to it. So sometimes it's like I read it, but that it's like the juices in the comments, and it's the like so good, and it's goes deeper, and just beautiful. So definitely for everybody who is listening, head to LinkedIn, and if you're for some reason not there, the website where they can find some samples of your like part kind of like, it's not obviously the content, the richness of the content that you have on LinkedIn is your website. And I will put it in show notes as well, but it's the name of your company, Cogniventus.com. So, but we'll remind everybody and put it in show notes.
Yeah. And
Okay.
Cogniventus means literally knowledge to come. And the tagline is, when knowing who you are changes who you are. It speaks to that, or changes who you are. It was originally knowing who you are changes who you are. And someone on LinkedIn about 8 years ago said, no, that's not right. And I had to put the when in to say what I am talking about is the possibility of the instantaneous transformation, that there is a vision of reality that's clear enough that it's immediately transformative. And this is not not a new idea. I remember talking to a Sikh about that I worked with about what the meaning of Dharma was. And Dharma has a double meaning in that it means reality as it is, and also what you must do morally as a good person. So the clearer vision of reality you have, the more your actions will be virtuous and upright. And I don't mind those classical terms.
Since you brought up Dharma, I have to share one of the quotes that I learned it from Stephen Pope's The Greatest Work of Your Life book, probably downstairs. But it's not he said, he quoted the Gospel of Thomas, I think, and it says, When you bring forth what's within you, what you bring forth will save you. When you do not bring forth what's within you will destroy you.
Mhm.
For me, it was that knowing who I am and living my truth, and some might call it potential, is that what was the saving grace for me, versus not bringing forth, because sometimes you don't know what it is, who you are, and but then it's even knowing, but if you're not living it, if you're not expressing it in the world in whatever form of service or work that you can be doing, that's what's going to destroy you. And that's for me where like addiction was for me personally, and I witness it as a people. They're just like not bringing forth what's within them, like not living out who they are. These are knowing or not. So that's on the Dharma side. Well, what I really want to get into for us, make sure that we cover, is the long-term recovery. Because a lot of people are concerned, obviously, with intervention and stopping a very acute addiction when it's like completely out of control and you need to seek medical attention and it's so destroying. So, and but then when that kind of tamed to a certain degree, and people doing their work and people going to meetings, so they're seeing therapists or doing whatever other identity building and as a work, that seemed to be this notion that I witnessed in myself and other people in recovery, that it's like a whack-a-mole. It's shape-shifting. You're addicted to alcohol, now you're addicted to work. Now you're addicted to sports, and now you're addicted to overspending, overeating, and maybe, romantic relationships. Like, it's just like migrates that some people kind of resign themselves, this will never end. It will be one thing after another. It's like peeling the onion. So tell us, from your point of view, what's up with that? Like, again, shape-shifting, moving around, and even maybe this is a good way to address the word recovery.
The word recovery originally had a very limited sort of meaning. In fact, the word recovered was what was preferred. That there was a beginning and that there was an end to the process. Bill Wilson talked about remember that we're only operating a spiritual kindergarten. Give you a jump start, go out into the world. So if you're depending on any recovery program for the rest of your life, I mean, really depending on it, if you identify with it, in a lot of ways, you're sustaining your addiction. It's not out. One of the things I've often said is that if your life revolves around your recovery, your life still revolves around your addiction. If you're talking about it, you're still feeding the beast constantly.
So many people not gonna like it, what you're saying.
Oh, I know, but I also know a lot of people are going to go, I know that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean I know people. I can think of one in particular who go to meetings, likes meetings, been going for like 50 years now, but he's not all caught up in the idea of recovery. He doesn't pick up anniversary chips. So it's a matter of how much you identify, you take on that as part of being your identity. That's a separate thing from what happens underneath. I've talked about how an addiction can assemble from any number of things under the radar, did with me. So paying attention to, it's not about triggers. It's about paying attention. And I could see it myself when I went out to drink after 15 years of sobriety. Okay. It was inevitable. One of the problems with the immediate release that I had at the age of 25 was that my best friend was taken away from me without me giving me a chance to say goodbye. And alcohol was my best friend. And that's not an unusual thing. People use that sort of idea. But I never made that decision that I wasn't going to live an alcohol-free life. So that's a seed that's there. And then as you go on, I begin to hear things in AA. Begin to doubt some of them. And once you begin that doubt, then the process starts. Maybe everything I thought has. So it was inevitable for me to go back out again. So as far as the whack-a-mole, the shape-shifting, just because you've stopped drinking doesn't mean, or stopped doing whatever, just because the addiction ends doesn't mean the war within self ended at all. It's still there operating. I'm not exactly sure where you want me to go with this, what particular aspect of.
So would you say that if the addiction continues, like shape shifting and taking on other forms of, maybe process addiction, maybe different substances, like maybe it's sugar, it's not alcohol, and, it's sugar, whatever, eating. And it's more like you're in the harm reduction phase, or is it you're not really addressing the root cause if it still kind of reassembles itself and manifests into something else? So yeah, because like it's tiresome, and it seems like a continuing managing, something that you kind of will never end.
Okay, well, let's talk about the difference between the word recovery and discovery, because
Okay.
I know that's, yeah. Recovery means to return to some former state of well-being. Okay, it looks backwards. Okay, discovery, which I think is a better word to describe how to keep the addiction from reassembling, let's just say it that way, or from changing to another form. There are really two main causes, general causes for an addiction that I can think of. And one is just an incomplete experience of life. It's just something's missing. And you need to put that thing back in. And the other one is not paying attention to how, from one simple idea in consciousness, how that can snowball, combine with other ideas, and eventually create the elements for an addiction to come out again. So to start to pay attention to ordinary life and to realize that's where the power is. When we get into recovery, we want to think everything's going to be special. I'm in recovery. Well, why are you talking about being in recovery? Well, it's because it's special. Because I'm living a life of recovery. In fact, they even want to say, it used to be sobriety was the thing as far as drinking. Sobriety is the gold standard, because sobriety is not just abstinence, it's also living a sober lifestyle of judiciousness, of good grace, that sort of thing. But now they're even saying, no, sobriety is not enough. You have to be in recovery, because then you're really fully in there. See, so there's this constant grasping to make what is really ordinary life for all of us, to make it special. And
I like this offering of discovery, yeah. Because it's
so,
like recovering is almost like you're still kind of like trying to return to some original state, when this is completely not something we're doing.
a state that probably never existed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may just imagine it exists, but it's so important that when you're in recovery, that you put, that you're doing great. And even if you're struggling, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm in recovery, so it's still good. Discovery is a different sort of discovery means to unveil. Okay. So what you're unveiling what was already there. So in a real sense, that placebo effect and all that other sort of stuff, the end of addiction that we talked about, it's a pathless path. There's no program, there's no series of steps that will bring you from addiction to the end of addiction. Krishnamurti talked about this all the time. And it has to, and it's also about having that clear, such a clear vision of who you are, that who you are changes in that moment. And you have to have the attitude of an explorer, of a discoverer, of being open-ended. Whatever comes next, that's, you know, that's the thing. And the people I know who don't have the problems in recovery, and I worked with a lot of them. In fact, most of the people that I worked with over like 40 years or so were people who had done everything they were supposed to, or in recovery, this and that, and they're still not happy. Well, there's a sort of a generic unsatisfactoriness and unhappiness about what it means to be human. The problem is you're thinking about yourself as addicted when you're really should be thinking about who you are as a human being. And that inquisitive discovery, it's a much more active, and it sustains you for a longer period of time. And what you discover is that you don't need to be seeking, and this is ironic because we talked about this instantaneous liberation. You don't need to be seeking spiritual experiences. You don't need to be seeking extraordinary experiences. You know, just ordinary living is so extraordinary when you pay attention to it.
Let me just repeat it again. Ordinary living is extraordinary
when you just pay attention to it. Yeah, it's what was that William Blake? Infinity in the palm of my hand. I can't remember but the quote. But you can see everything in a blade of grass. You can see a whole person's history just by looking them in the eyes and connecting with them in that way. We've turned recovery has come to mean something, a second chance in life. You know, you got a second chance. Go forth, do better. We've turned it into, we've turned it into a tagline. We've turned it into political. It's a political term now too. We want recovery-informed communities and recovery-informed schools and recovery-informed everything, you know. And I can imagine, I'm glad I don't have to work to go in, have a job, and then I'm going to get a special instructions on how I'm supposed to treat people who are in recovery. You know, it's this odd thing that has just gone off the rails. That's why I don't even use the term anymore. It gives me the creeps. It really does. It just, I get this uneasy feeling. I mean, I get what you're saying. I get what people are saying about getting their lives back. But a life of discovery, I would say, is infinitely superior to a life of just constantly recovering. And I think maybe this, I've been trying to figure out, I think that people need to be told that they have a choice about how they live. They're drug-free or they're alcohol-free. They have a choice in how they live it. I decide how I process things. I decide how I'm going to live. And taking responsibility for that is sort of a dangerous thing. It's a terrifying thing, but it's a necessary thing. LinkedIn here pushed me to finally come out and be who I am. Like right now, what I'm doing here. I had given up on addiction recovery. I wrote about this, but not everyone read it.
And I
So
mean, you give up an addiction recovery in terms of like trying
10
to
years ago, 10 years ago,
influence, but not, do you mean your personal or trying to influence the industry or marketplace?
same thing. I consulted for industries. I worked with thousands of alcoholics over 40 years. I just said, I've done my due diligence. I've done my service. I walked away. I walked away from LinkedIn. This, I think it was 2008. I grew my hair out. I grew my beard out. I said, mystical contemplation and good old research. I'm going into isolation. I'm going to be a recluse. And it's just, I had a chance encounter with a CEO of a major rehab, one of the biggest in the world. And I said, okay, I'm gonna give this one last chance. And so I came back to LinkedIn, and a lot of people were still here, a lot of people were still gone. And I had no intention of staying past a few months. And then people started appearing, people like you. They just started, and they asking questions. I said, okay. And then all of a sudden, it's like, there is a chance. Because I essentially thought it was impossible. It was just impossible for me to work in this field.
And I told you it's because people like you're ahead of their time, visionary,
Well,
and
yeah.
so I'm happy you came back, and I'm happy that, when I read your writing, I was like, oh, he's saying stuff that I know in my bones, but I wouldn't have put it in writing like this. And I write my response to your post, and you tell me later, oh, she gets it, and she said it in a way that maybe even this particular one was a bit better and then I said it, and she kind of like, we rephrase, we use our own, like, words are so powerful, like, we each words mean different things, and we keep articulating and naming things. So we had this in some sort of like mini intellectual collaboration on moving ideas forward. And now look at us. I'm doing a podcast and you're on my podcast. Who could have known that it's possible? But it is.
Yeah, it's my work has always been interactive. I need the input of people to challenge me. I can do pretty good work on my own, but I don't really get the things that soar, the things that make me get up at 5 a.m. And immediately go and write down what I'm thinking. And there's a lot of beauty to that. And this is the podcast. I like the impossible idea. I thought that it was impossible. I just impossible. I cannot work within this addiction recovery community. It's not good for me. They're not getting what I'm saying. We're wearing each other down. I didn't blame anyone. I just said it's just impossible. And over the last almost 2 years on LinkedIn, I've changed that. I know that it's possible. It's just difficult. The couple of things that we need to do is figure out a way to break down some of the barriers. The addiction recovery community is a self-contained bubble. Many of them know that. And I've had people who present themselves one way on LinkedIn. But when they direct message me, I go, how can you present yourself like this and you say you like what I do? I get it. They have positions to protect.
Yeah.
They created that. But the thing is, and this is where I want to get back to that paradigm idea.
Yeah, let's go there. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is a way to sort of pull it all together. What most people think of paradigm is, and Kuhn wrote in Structure of Scientific Revolutions, one of the most quoted books ever. controversial. Most people think a paradigm shift is just, well, you changed an idea, we're doing something else. So a paradigm really is what we talked about, a foundational event, which is that if you let go, an addiction will end immediately. Okay. How does that happen? Well, you need a group of people interested enough in that question to gather around the person or the group of people for whom that foundational event. And then you need to do research in a very general sense of the term. You need to ask questions like, okay, if it's 1 out of 10, how do we get the other 9 into that sort of thing? And even in the history of AA, they started out, the original description of that of surrender event was cured by God. That's what they said in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, cured by God. And then they say, man, we can't do that. And then it was spiritual experience, which seems very immediate. But then people weren't getting that too. So they said spiritual awakening. And then finally, when you get to the 12, it's like, well, pretty much any positive change. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, because the addiction recovery community now is saying the parallel is amazing. So what happens is that we had a group of people, Alcoholics Anonymous. This is first time, certainly in American history, formed around and said, you know what, we're taking this idea and we're running with it. But what they didn't realize is they didn't have they had a paradigm. They didn't realize it. They didn't realize that they needed to do research. They needed to start looking at why some people go out, some people do this. They just got together and just thought it was a support group. We do these particular steps, we get this result, never questioning, well, do we tweak at this? Do we do that? And so a paradigm is a foundational event around which a group of enthusiastic people do research. And that's the way science works. And not the guarantee is that you will move away from error. In other words, you won't necessarily get a truth. You'll move away from error. So the only paradigm I know in history that has existed for addiction is that letting go of the war within self. It popped up in a little place in America there. Okay. I know of no functional addiction paradigm like that operating in the addiction recovery community. So I guess what I'm saying is I thought it was impossible because in 40 years, I would say to someone now that their chances, a person who is addicted, their chances now are probably worse than they were 40 years ago. Now, I know people will object to that, but what I mean by that is that we have the illusion of knowledge. We've lost the humility. We've lost the pioneering spirit of how are we gonna make this better. And so we're floundering. But the good news is that once I realized that this is because we don't have a functional paradigm. In other words, a foundational event around which a community grows, does research, and moves everyone forward at the same time. Extraordinary thing. That's how science works. Because we don't have that, the situation right now in the addiction recovery community is completely explainable. It makes perfect sense. Taking historical, there was no way that it would not have happened in America. So that's the good news. The bad news is that so it is possible. And a lot of people have been contacting me, usually like CEOs or people who run companies on LinkedIn, particularly the last couple of months, saying we agree we need that unifying principle. And so my job is to try to provide that principle using that war within self and to show them how they can fit any one of their models into it. And it will do one thing that they may help, and I know they're helping people. I know people are being helped all the time, but we're not moving forward. Where the treatments will not improve. We won't be able to distinguish between can't distinguish between one kind of addiction and another, because that's what the paradigm does.
Yeah,
The
and it's
paradigm,
also, yeah, go ahead. No, finish. Yeah, I'll say.
no, the paradigm creates the structure to move away from error, and that's what it's very important to say that, to constantly move away from error. And we do not have that. AA had it, forgot about it, and lost it. So the addiction recovery community thinks they have it. But just saying that addiction is a disease and here's the treatment, how is that any way like? Addiction is a war within self, and if you let go, it ends instantly. There's a big difference, between those. That's a very clear thing, and it's narrow. And that's the thing, is a paradigm has to be narrowly defined. People have asked me about this, because that's the only way. If you try to include everything, biopsychosocial, all that sort of stuff, you get lost in the
Yeah,
forest.
it's all has place, and it's all very valid and much needed
Yes.
to be, looked at and acknowledged and improved. But it's just too overwhelming, fragmented, and just it's easy to give up, and the hope, it's a hopeless, and it's very scary for majority of people, because it's almost those who happen to encounter addiction either firsthand or through their very close family members, and they have enough curiosity to start learning, understanding, looking, searching. They're the lucky ones. They stop being afraid, and they start like understanding and finding their way in whatever speed they're able to do it. But for majority, like my perception that for majority of people, you say the word addiction, or it pops up in the family, or somebody who is recovering out loud, let's call it that, mentions that they are in overcame addiction, people just freeze, and people get awkward, and people get uncomfortable, and there is tremendous amount of stigma, because no matter how much you can call it disease, family members of addicts who die, don't say that they get the same reaction if they said my nephew died of cancer. They don't have this, they don't get the same condolences if you say, like, you have a family member who died of addiction and overdose, like, well, they've done it to themselves. And so it's really it's a very scary. So like on the addiction community is very fragmented. They're at war with themselves. They're fighting between each other in what I witnessed. There is obviously people who are really good at building communities, and I'm part of one of those communities. She recovers, and I'll bring the founder of that organization and that movement on one of the upcoming episodes, because it's there are places when people can come together and be of different backgrounds and be of different addictions, and find support, because that connection is definitely important, and not being alone and isolated and in shame and so on. And but at the same time, they're hard to find. Not many people know easily how to find, and I think it needs to be more accepted. It's not us and addicts. It's like we're all addicts in one way or another. And understanding what you said, it's how I wouldn't go, you have to correct me. How did you say about it? It's part of the human condition. It's not like, like it's more unifying, that it's part of the experience, and it's not just like, oh, they got this disease or virus of addiction and I don't, because we'll do it in
There's-
a different way, in a different behavior, and we just sometimes it manifests and gets acute at different times. And if some of people like truly lucky, not lucky, because I mean we discussed experiencing going through addiction is actually highly deepening experience of getting to know ourselves, getting to know humanity. It's almost like, you know, there is so many people that say, I'm gratefully recovered alcoholic, because, and, you know, we get to know an amazing wisdom, we get to meet an amazing people, we get to discover interesting things that if we didn't have addiction, I wouldn't have had that experience. If somebody wanted to prevent the disease of addiction completely, I don't know how I would have had that experience. Not that we absolutely must have it, like the whole point of this conversation, that we can actually let it go and go on a self-discovery and you know, self-exploration and knowledge without immense suffering. But as it's still here for us to experience, we can have a more a truer, I don't want to say holistic, like I had a bunch of words that I wanted to apply to it, but it's almost like the true, the honest look at it. What is it? So
there's nothing about addiction that cannot be explained with very simple, non-technical terminology. The most complex model that I have for it, and that little operational definition, I've got a couple others that I've worked on for a long time and tweaking them. The most complex model uses 9 terms. That's it. 9 terms to describe the mechanics of how addiction is put together. And it's when we begin to understand, I mean, there's no real psychology of addiction. I mean, there's addiction medicine, addiction science, addiction this. They're all terms to describe extremely immature disciplines. And I mean simply in the scientific sense or the technical sense, not immature as in, you know, judgmental. But there really is no science. I mean, we look at the brain science, okay, neuroscience and brain disease. And I can count on one hand the number of people who realize if you just called it a brain injury, it would completely change the way we do the science. Yeah, because it's they haven't been able to find a brain disease. They haven't been able to find that sort of thing that, you know, that part of the brain, something in there, a lesion or something that you call a brain disease. But clearly it's a brain injury. I mean, I've talked about that for about 20 years, but clearly it's a brain injury. So you can heal from that, but I would say there's a completely different attitude you would have toward someone who has injured their brain and someone who has a diseased brain. I mean, even the disease we still stigmatize. But the thing about stigma is that William White a long time ago wrote an essay warning, and his warnings weren't heeded, that essentially any attempt to stop the stigma will just backfire and stigmatize stop the stigmatizer. In other words, now it's become stigma to be in recovery. It used to be stigma just to be addicted. And people have a right to think what they want to think. We know that. We don't want to take that away from them. That also means that they have the right to think badly. And no amount of so-called education, no amount of coercion, no amount of saying, you must listen to me, I'm recovered, I have special needs, that sort of thing. That's not going to, none of that's going to work. The only thing that I say, and probably a really bad time to bring this up, is that we still refuse to look at the moral dimension of addiction. And the post that really took off the most on LinkedIn is when I said, by going from a medical to a moral to a medical model of addiction, we just traded one shame for another. It hasn't done any good whatsoever. Because deep down, we're moral creatures. We try to do right. We don't know how to a lot of the times. So to say that addiction is biological, psychological, social, everything, but not moral. Oh no, it's everything except moral. That's the only, they'll list every single, addiction involves every aspect of being a human, but certainly not moral.
Yeah, and
How is that possible?
Yeah, and at some point I fell into it myself when I was, defending somebody, and I said, it's not a moral failing, but again, like back to the words, how we define words, it changes, like kind of change your word. Like what was that you say about changing words, changing reality?
Choose your words, choose your worlds.
Yeah, and because the definition that like I think that I definitely like for the longest time, like I even had a triggered reaction to the word potential. Like I couldn't hear the word potential. Can you imagine? Like, so when somebody would tell me something about potential, like I was like, I did not like the word potential at all. And because of what it meant to me, because of my lived experience, and some people don't like the word grateful. They say because it carries that obligation, you should be grateful. So the words, there is a diction. That's why it's so helpful. And I learned it in the last couple of years. Just go look up the word in a dictionary and really see what the dictionary said, what the different definitions, and like really examine, like I had to do it with words like humility, like what is it? Because there is certain perception, and the same with the word morals and morality. Like, yeah, the word discipline, like sometimes feels like limitations, like, so the words are so unique, and we can control how other people will react to certain words, but like how we use certain words and what they mean to us, I think is very important to know. Yeah, I mean, some people allergic to the word God and religion, and on another hand, people don't like the word spirituality. So I think that I don't think we're gonna
It's
resolve.
not that I don't like it. I don't know if you're referring to my. Yeah, I said that spirituality is religion without a backbone. I said that one time, and it's not that. Well, I've told you before. I choose particular words because I want to create a differentiation between what I do and what other people do, because there is a difference, and you can't tell the difference unless I choose words that demonstrate that. The tendency for anyone when they hear, or any groups, or you hear something new, I call it the pseudopodic ego, like when one of those cells, it just sees something foreign and it just engulfs around it. The tendency of the pseudopodic ego is that when it hears something that threatens its sense of self, it absorbs it, just absorbs it, changes it so that it's acceptable.
I call it weaponizing it.
Yes, yes. So that happens. So what I need to do is, when I'm talking like this, is to be very clear and to keep that down to a minimum. When somebody says, "Oh, that's just Michael, what you're saying is not original. That's just like so and so," and I go, okay. What word can I use to make sure that I'm distinguishing what I'm doing from so and so? And when people do that, it's very useful. All those sort of comments are useful. But I think we all have to. It's good to do that. It's good to realize how much uniqueness we all bring to the table. and to be clear on what it is. And to, there's certain things, I don't do as a part. I'm not interested in a lot of things that are going on in addiction recovery. Not because there's anything wrong. I'm not interested in psychedelics. As a scientist, it's interesting, but I have limited time now. Things like harm reduction, all those sorts of things are very important. And there are people, that's their lane, that's what they do. But that's not what I do. What I do comes around this, and even my company name and the tagline, it's about a clarity of vision. It's about seeing the world in such a way that it immediately transforms you and the world that you're in. On a small scale, a big scale, it doesn't matter. But that's what I'm looking for. I want to raise the bar that high. Now, well, that's too hard, Michael. Well, I'm not. I'm just do what you want to do. But this is what I need to do. And it's taken a long time for me to realize that this is my lane. And it's been my lane since I signed that little as
and I think that that's
7-year-old.
interesting. It was very telling what we fixate on as children. And I just want to say that I'm so happy you agreed to be with me today, have the discussion, so people get to hear kind of auditory, visually, like you expressing your ideas that's so well articulated in writing already. And my vision for you is to have bigger following, to give people, to continue giving oxygen to both iteration of the idea, and also taking it to their lives, to their practices, and growing. And I just want to, I'm looking to, so I don't want to end this. Obviously, I want to continue talking, but we need, for the sake of, for the sake of everybody else, we want to wrap it up. So I have something in mind to close it with, but before that, I want to ask you if there is anything else, any sort of last thought or call to something that you want to leave listeners with as a book ending.
Well, I think that the recent sort of obsession, I think, with connection, which is important. We need connection. But the world out there, there's so much information. We can't, and certainly as a result of AI now, we can't trust what we see, what we hear at all. And if you haven't developed the ability to discriminate, I think Carl Sagan called it the BS detector way back in the days. Yeah. Then if you can't trust what's out there, there's only one other choice. You got to trust what's in here. And so I'm not trying to be isolationist. I'm not trying to, I do have a tendency to like solitude. But solitude is not loneliness. And I think that we are going to be forced as individuals and as a society to begin to fall back on some individualistic values, to take responsibility for who we are, and even moral responsibility, which is not causal responsibility. I pick up a piece of paper, a litter. I didn't put it there, but I accept moral responsibility. So, did I choose to become an addict? I didn't cause that, but I choose to take moral responsibility for becoming an addict. not just being one, becoming one. I can't tell someone else to do that. That wouldn't be fair. But so I see myself, and it's sort of odd that the more I take individual responsibility, the more I feel connected to everyone else. Because in a real sense, I am. We're all. So that's it. I just learn to trust yourself a little more, because it will be increasingly difficult to trust anything out there. And we're already at a bad point with that. That's all I have for that.
Very powerful mic drop, you know? Thank you. Thank you. Very empowering and full of hope. And I feel like you wrote a permission slip for people to have agency over their lives and to practice the muscle, to build that muscle of trusting ourselves. And that's more important than worrying about which information out there is correct or not. You know, we didn't get today too much into religion, spirituality part, which I know we can do separate podcasts just on that. But I want to actually close with some of the lyrics from the song that I learned from you, because you quoted the lyrics. You quoted the lyrics when I asked you a question in private discussion, knowing the depths of your understanding of various religions. I said, so Michael, do you know why we're here? Why do you think we're here? And you said, I don't know. You know, I was like, what? You should know. You know so much. And you said, do you know the song Julia for a Dancer by Jackson Brown? And I didn't know. So you quoted, and then I looked it up. And the words that, it's not my closing words, but the words that you offered to me in terms of why we're here is the ending of it. And somewhere between the time you arrive and the time you go may lie a reason you were alive that you will never know. And for me, it was like, I felt peace. I was like, I don't have to figure it out. But today, to close our discussion, I want to read some other lyrics. And this first one is addressed to you, Michael, to keep you going. Keep a fire burning in your eye. Pay attention to the open sky. You never know what will be coming down. Keep a fire for a human race. Let your prayers go drifting into space. You never know what will be coming down. Perhaps a better world is drawing near, just as easy as it can all disappear, along with whatever meaning you might have found. And for our listeners and viewers that will be putting together their understanding and their pathways and patchworks of recovery, discovery, I want to read these words from the same song. Just do the steps that you've been shown by everyone you've ever known until the dance becomes your very own. Into a dancer that you have grown from a seed somebody else has thrown. Go on ahead and throw some seeds of your own. And I need to have like a closing song playing. Maybe I'll put it in the podcast version. Thank you so much, and keep going. And for everybody, find Michael V. Cossette on LinkedIn. First, we can Google the name, and also the website for the company will come up, Cogniventus. And Michael's email is very public on the website, and email is cogniventus@gmail.com. And thank you so much. And
you're welcome. Thank you very much.
More to come. Goodbye, everybody.
Hope so.